relentless, hollow ticking of the wall clock in my studio apartment became the soundtrack to my unraveling, a sound that only truly announced itself after I started the night shift at the all-night copy shop downtown, a soul-sucking job that left me returning home just after 3 a.m., my skin perpetually smelling of overheated toner and stale coffee, my mind a fuzzy static of exhaustion that no amount of cheap diner coffee could cut through. The first night it happened, I was in that bleary-eyed limbo between the outside world and my meager sanctuary, towing off my grease-stained sneakers by the door, the deadbolt clicking shut with finality that always felt like a small, hard-won victory against the creeping silence of the witching hour, when I heard it. Not the usual settling groans of the old building or the distant, mournful wail of the siren, but a knock, crisp, deliberate, and unbearably present, 3 distinct raps that seemed to vibrate the very cheap with my front door and resonate in the hollow of my chest. I froze, one shoe dangling uselessly in my hand, my blood turning to a sluggish, icy slurry in my veins, my eyes, dragged against their will, found the digital clock on my microwave glowing a sickly, radioactive green. 3:17 a.m. Who knocks at 3:17 a.m.? My sleep-deprived brain, always eager to supply the worst-case scenario, offered a rapid-fire slideshow. Cops with bad news, a neighbor bleeding out from some domestic disaster, a stranger whose car had broken down in the relentless rain that had started to patter against my window. But the hallway, when I finally mustered the courage to creep forward and press my eye to the cold brass of the peephole, was a distorted fishbowl of empty, yellowing light, utterly, profoundly still, the geometric pattern of the ugly carpet stretching into a silent, vacant infinity. I chalked it up to the stress, to the auditory hallucinations of a mind starved for proper REM sleep, and spent the rest of that night with every light in the apartment blazing, jumping at the side of the refrigerator kicking on. The ping of the radiator, my own shadow startled me as I moved from room to room, a prisoner in my own home, but the pattern held with a terrifying precision for an entire week. I'd stumble home. The electronic clock on the stove would click over to that unholy minute, and the 3 knocks would come, a grim, metronomic punctuation to my deepening loneliness and fear. I stopped looking to the peephole after the 3rd night, because on that night, I didn't see emptiness. I saw the fleeting, dark impression of shoulder, clad in what looked like a dark, heavy fabric, pulling away from the doorframe, and shadow that stretched too long and thin down the hall, a silhouette that seemed subtly wrong in its proportions, the head a touch too small, the arms a hint too long, a trick of the light, I desperately told myself, even as my gut screamed otherwise. Desperation, a more potent force than fear, finally led me to my landlord, a weary, perpetually scowling man named Frank, who managed a building from a basement office that smelled of cat urine and old newspapers. He listened to my frantic, jumbled story while chewing on an unlit cigar, his expression one of benign annoyance, but as I mentioned the time, 3:17 a.m., and described the 3 knocks, his face underwent a terrifying transformation, the color draining from his jowly cheeks until he was a shade of old ashes. "Apartment 4B," he muttered, more to the stained ceiling tiles than to me. "You're in 4B. I should have known." He told me then, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was far more frightening than if he had shouted, about the previous tenant, a reclusive night watchman named Alistair who had died in the apartment, not discovered for weeks until the smell, a sweet rotten fug, had finally seeped under the door and alerted the other residents. "The coroner's report said he'd been dead for about a month," Frank said, finally meeting my eyes with a look of profound pity. "But Mrs. Gable and foresee a sweet old lady, not a liar. She swore on her late husband's Bible that she heard him coming home every night for 2 weeks after they carted the body out. Same time. Always. He'd knock before entering," she said. "A habit. 3 sharp knocks. Like he was announcing himself to the empty dark, a courtesy to the ghosts." Frank, shaken, handed me a new, heavier deadbolt from a dusty box under his desk and told me, without conviction, to forget about it, to get some sleep. That night, armed with a new lock and a desperate, foolish courage born of sheer terror, I decided not to ignore it. I would confront it at 3:17 a.m. As the knocks echoed through the silence like gunshots, I didn't cower in my bedroom. Instead, I stood 5 feet from the door, my voice trembling but clear, and called out, "Alistair, is that you? You can come in." The knocking ceased instantly, severed as if by a guillotine blade, replaced by a silence so profound it felt like a physical pressure on my eardrums, a vacuum sucking all sound from the world. Then, slowly, with metallic slowness that made my stomach heave, the doorknob began to turn left, then right, testing the new, sturdy lock I had just installed. A soft, wet scratching sound started at the base of the door, not like metal on wood, but like something organic, something damp, nails, or perhaps something softer, something blunted, dragging methodically across a wood grain. But the true horror, the revelation that unspooled my sanity, didn't come from a hallway. It came from behind me. From the absolute darkness of my tiny, windowless bathroom, I heard the distinct, rusty squeak of the medicine cabinet door swinging open on its hinges, a sound I knew intimately, a sound I heard every morning and every night, a sound that belonged solely to the interior geography of my life. A cold, dank breath, smelling of old soil, spoiled meat, and something coppery washed over the back of my neck, lifting the fine hairs there. I realized my catastrophic error too late, the understanding dawning with the slow, crushing weight of a tombstone. I hadn't invited in whatever was knocking, whatever was in the hall. By speaking the name, by offering the invitation, I had acknowledged and welcomed the presence of whatever had been living inside the apartment with me all along, waiting in the dark, quiet spaces, the entity that had arrived not with the knocks, but with the silence that followed Alistair's death. The knocking had never been an attempt to get in from the outside. It had always been a warning, a desperate signal from the lingering echo of the previous tenant, a plea for me to get out before whatever it claimed him turned its attention to the new resident. I had not opened the door to the hallway. I had opened a door within the apartment, within myself, and the thing that stepped through from the darkness of my own bathroom was no longer just an uninvited visitor. It was now a permanent, dreadful roommate. The profound silence of my grandmother's sprawling, decaying Victorian house was a different kind of terror than the cramped dread of my old apartment. It was a thick, velvety quiet, heavy with dust and the ghosts of memories I couldn't quite grasp. I'd fled the city after the incident, seeking the false sanctuary of my childhood summers, the place where I'd once felt safe baking cookies in the enormous, sun-drenched kitchen. Now, the kitchen was a tomb of shrouded appliances, and the sunlight that filtered through the grimy leaded windows seemed tired and thin. Grief for my grandmother, a stoic, elegant woman who'd smelled of powder and gardenias, was a dull ache in my chest, but it was intertwined with a sharper, more primal fear. The fear of the knock, of the specific, cursed time of 3:17 a.m. The first night, exhausted from moving boxes and emotional turmoil, I collapsed in the feather bed in my old room, the familiar patterns of water stains on the ceiling morphing into monstrous shapes in the gloom. I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, a blessed emptiness. Then, precisely at 3:17 a.m., I was jolted awake not by sound, but by an overwhelming, cloying sensory assault, the choking, suffocating fragrance of gardenias, my grandmother's signature perfume, a scent so thick and potent it felt solid, coating the back of my throat, seeping into my sinuses, making my eyes water and my head swim. It was the smell of her hugs, of her presence. But here, in the dead of night, it was wrong, a grotesque parody of comfort. And beneath that sweet, sickly smell was a sound, a deep, rhythmic, resonant thud, thud, thud that seemed to originate not from a single point, but from the very bones of the house, a heartbeat from within the walls. My own heart hammered a frantic counter-rhythm. This wasn't a knock on a door. This was something entombed. Try to get out. I descended the grand, creaking staircase, a heavy brass fire poker gripped in my sweat-slick hand, the floral scent becoming a nauseating fog that clung to my clothes and skin. The pounding led me not to the front door, but to the basement door, a heavy, oak slab set on the stairs, secured by an ancient, rusted latch I'd been forbidden from touching as a child. "The foundation is unstable, dear," Gran would say, her voice leaving no room for argument. The sound was clearest there, a steady, patient, terrifying beat that vibrated to the iron latch and into my fingertips. Convinced it was an intruder, a squatter, anything my rational mind could latch onto, I threw open the door. It revealed not a staircase, but a pitch-black maw, The smell of gardenias now violently married to the wet, earthy mineral reek of a long-sealed tomb of clay and decay. The pounding stopped instantly. The sudden silence was worse. I fumbled for the light switch. A single, bare bulb 40 feet below flickered to life, illuminating a steep flight of concrete steps disappearing into the gloom. And there, on each step, placed with meticulous care, was a single pristine, freshly cut gardenia, their waxy white petals luminous against the grimy concrete, dewdrops clinging to them like tears. A cold, understanding horror, deeper than any fear of a stranger, began to seep into me. This was a ritual. This was a trail. I followed it, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous space, each gardenia crushing under my weight with soft, fleshy sound, releasing more of that oppressive perfume. The basement was not a chaotic storage space. It was a curated chamber of profound, intimate sadness. Neat stacks of my own childhood toys, a wooden train set, a box of army men, sat beside ancient, cobweb-draped furniture draped in sheets. It was a museum of a hidden life. And in the center of the room, resting on an old steamer trunk streaked with rust, was my grandmother's ornate, inlaid jewelry box, the one that had always sat atop her dresser, a sacred object I was never allowed to touch. Its lid was open, an invitation. The pounding started again, not from the walls this time, but from inside the trunk itself, a frantic, weak, desperate pounding, the sound of fists with little strength left. My hands shook so violently I could barely lift the jewelry box's lid. Inside, nestled not on velvet but on a pile of aged, yellowed letters tied with faded ribbon, was a single human molar, dull and stained. Beneath it, a photograph, a man I recognized from other, happier pictures as my grandfather, a man who had allegedly abandoned the family before I was born. But in this photo, he was not smiling. He was staring directly into the camera with wide, bloodshot eyes filled with pure animal terror, his mouth a dark, stained hole. The letters, all in my grandmother's elegant, looping script, were not love notes. They were confessions, diaries of a decades-long imprisonment. Page after page of chillingly mundane entries detailed a hidden life. The gardenias masked the smell of the chamber pot. He knocked for 3 hours today. I played the radio louder. His strength is failing. The broth is not enough. The knocking comes at 3:17 now. It is when he is most lucid, when he remembers who he is and what I've done. The final entry, dated the day she died of sudden stroke, was written in a tremulous, barely legible hand. I have run out of things to feed him. I am so tired. The knocking will stop soon, one way or another. Forgive me, my love. Forgive us both. The pounding from the trunk ceased. In its place, from a deep unlit corner behind a monstrous, hulking furnace, I heard a dry, rattling inhalation, the sound of ruined lungs drawing in air. Then, the soft, shuffling scrape of bare feet on concrete, moving slowly, deliberately, toward the circle of light where I stood, the last of the gardenias turning to pulp in my frozen hand. The highway unspooled before me like a tape of pure, unbroken blackness, my headlights carving a trembling tunnel through the rain that started an hour ago, a cold, insistent downpour that mirrored the internal storm I was fleeing. The city, the house. They were nested horrors, one inside the other, and I drove with a frantic, illogical certainty that if I could just put enough miles between me and my past, the metaphysical stain of it all would simply wash away in the rear view. The gaslight blinked on, a yellow-eyed judgment, just as I saw the sign, Knight's Rest Motel, Vac CY. It was a place of last resort, a low-slung, L-shaped concrete block painted a faded, sickly green, its neon sign sputtering a pathetic, incomplete promise. The clerk in the bulletproof booth was a gaunt, spectral man with eyes that held the flat sheen of a dried-up lake. He took my cash without a word, sliding a key attached to a heavy, green plastic diamond toward me, room 11 at the very end, farthest from the office and any semblance of life. The room was a sarcophagus of despair. Brown floral wallpaper peeling in leopard strips, a smell of mildew and industrial cleaner that fought a losing battle against the underlying scent of old cigarettes and stale sweat, a television with a cracked screen bolted to a particle board dresser. Exhaustion, a heavier weight than fear, claimed me before I could even kick off my shoes. I fell onto the scratchy bedspread and into a black, velvety nothingness, a void so complete it felt like a small death. I was ripped from it at exactly 3:17 a.m., not by a memory or a smell, but by a violent, urgent, physical pounding on my door, so forceful it shook the flimsy metal frame in its moorings and made the cheap painting of a sad boat rattle against the wall. Adrenaline, that old, toxic friend, flooded my system, a cocktail of every terror I'd ever known. This was different. This was real, present, human danger. I scrambled to the door, my heart a trapped bird, and pressed my eye to the peephole. A young woman, maybe in her 20s, her face a masterpiece of sheer, unadulterated panic, streaked with tears and grime and rain, her mascara creating black rivulets down her cheeks. She was frantically glancing over her shoulder down the dark, rain-slicked walkway, her body trembling violently. "Please," she screamed, her voice raw and piercing even through the door. "Please, God, let me in. He's coming. He followed me. He has a knife." Her fear was a live wire, sparking and dangerous, bypassing all logic, all the hard-learned lessons of whispered invitations and basement secrets. This was a person in immediate, mortal peril. My hand flew to the chain lock, my fingers clumsy with a sudden, heroic purpose. This was my chance, my redemption. To be a savior, not a victim. To finally slam a door shut on a cycle of horror by opening one for someone in need. I slid the chain free and threw open the door. She fell into the room, collapsing against me, her body racked with sobs, her fingers clutching the fabric of my jacket with desperate, icy strength. Thank you," she gasped, the words went broken. I quickly locked the door behind her, pushing the deadbolt and re-engaging the chain, peering out the peephole again. The walkway was empty, just the orange glow of the sodium lights and the relentless silver sheet of rain. "Who? Where?" I managed to ask, leading her to the room's single chair. She collapsed into it, hugging herself. A man in a black hoodie. He followed me from a highway. She wept, the story tumbling out between ragged breaths. A broken-down car, a refusal help from a trucker with a leering smile, deciding to walk, hearing footsteps, seeing a glint of metal, running until she saw the motel sign. She seemed so genuine, so utterly shattered. It wasn't until my own breathing began to slow, and I offered to call the police on the motel's chunky, beige phone, that the atmosphere in the room shifted, growing thick and cold. The sobbing stopped abruptly, cut off as if by a switch. "No police," she said, her voice suddenly flat, hollow, all the tremor gone. She looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw her eyes clearly. They were not the eyes of a terrified victim. They were calm, depthless, and chillingly knowing. A slow, eerie smile stretched across her face, a movement that didn't touch those dead eyes. "They can't help with this," she whispered, from the worn pocket of her damp jacket. She didn't pull a knife or a gun. She pulled out a small, old-fashioned cassette recorder, the kind with big buttons and a tiny microphone. She placed it on the nightstand, her movements deliberate, ritualistic, and pressed play. The tinny, distorted sound that emerged was unmistakable. 3 sharp, loud, simulated knocks, followed by the frantic, desperate voice of a man. My voice from my apartment a lifetime ago, saying, "Alistair, is that you? You can come in." The floor seemed to fall away beneath me. How? That moment existed only in my memory, in the dark of that cursed apartment. My blood turned to ice. "We've been trying to reach you," the woman said, her head tilting to an unnatural angle, studying me like a specimen. "You opened a door that night, not just a physical one, a threshold. You gave something permission. It has a taste for you now. It sends invitations." She gestured languidly at the recorder. Some people just hear the knocks. A rare few, they become the knocks. Then, when magicians flourish, she reached into her other pocket and placed a single, wilted gardenia, its petals brown at the edges, on the nightstand beside the whirring recorder. The motel room's phone rang then, a shrill, jarring sound that seemed to pierce my very bones. I stared at it, then back at her. Her smile widened, a crack in a porcelain mask. "It's for you." Numb, moving as if through deep water, I picked up the heavy receiver. There was no voice on the line, only a sound, a weak, rhythmic, muffled thumping, like a fist feebly pounding from inside a padded, insulated space. And beneath it, barely audible but horrifyingly distinct, the wet, ragged, sucking sound of someone trying to breathe through fluid-filled lungs, through a ruined mouth. The call was not coming from the office. It was coming from inside the room, from the narrow, dark closet behind me, the one with the hollow, sliding door. The pounding in the closet grew stronger, synchronizing perfectly with the recorded knocks from the cassette player. The woman watched me, her hollow eyes gleaming with a terrible, pitying understanding. "It's not about where you run," she said softly, as she stood and walked calmly to the door, disengaging the chain and deadbolt with familiar ease. "It's about what you carry with you. You carry the invitation. It's in your voice. It's in your fear. And tonight, at 3:17 a.m., you answered again." She opened the door to the weeping night and stepped out, not running, simply fading into the rain-smeared darkness, leaving the door ajar. I was alone with the thing in the closet, with a recording of my own catastrophic choice, with the dying flower of my inherited sin. The pounding was now in my head, in my chest, a terrible symbiosis. I finally understood the true, unshakable horror. The uninvited visitor was never an external force to be locked out. It was a consequence, made manifest. It was the echo of my own voice giving permission, the spectral residue of my grandfather's hunger, the cumulative dread of every 3:17 a.m. I had ever endured. It was a part of me that recognized a knock, that leaned in to listen, that was forever waiting in the deepest, most desolate hour of the night to be let in. I was not a victim of my surroundings. I was the source. The knocking was now my own heartbeat. The invitation was my own breath, and every door, everywhere, was already forever open.